All right, everybody. My name is Jonathan Fisher from the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive, and today is our biweekly Zoom meeting for May 7th, 2025. Some news and notes for the community. Right now is the PNRA's annual fundraising appeal called Give Big. And whereas it's an all volunteer army, yours truly is a volunteer, as is everybody else, taking an opportunity, as they say on my public radio station, only the amount that you think that you can afford to be able to preserve programming such as this. Not that this program really costs any money, but the infrastructure of the institution and having an executive director and some of the other things, requires, they own their building, that requires maintenance. So anyway, this is the annual appeal. Normally PNRA doesn't appeal to its membership because they didn't want to be seen as conflicting with the railroad heritage organizations and their fundraising appeal, because those organizations help support the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive as well. So just we've got three sessions left in our spring program, and I'm already getting people, kind of bumping me going, hey, we need to get fall set up. So I'm starting to work on our fall programming schedule too. The three programs that we have left, May 21st. Now, May 21st is scheduled to be Roy Gelder, former Southern Pacific, of Western Washington University graduate Daniel, and finished his career at the Belt Railway of Chicago. Well, when he worked for SP, he was involved in the renovation of the Sunset Route from Kansas City to Tucumcari, New Mexico, and he was boots on the ground. So it's an interesting program. June 4th, one of our perennial favorites on the program, Robert W. Scott, will be back, and Robert will be talking about they'll be talking about rail fan cameras and being able to watch trains on the internet. Robert was a pioneer establishing the camera at Chehalis, and has helped out in Centennial, and has also helped out with the camera in Ritzville. And then our last program for our spring campaign, June 18th, it's kind of like one of those cooking shows like we had a couple of weeks ago with Craig Thorpe. It's a cooking show with Bob Kelly, former PNRA board president, and it's how to publish a railroad book. Bob recently published a book on Argus cameras, and it's about this thick. It's a very good book. And it's an opportunity to explain kind of some of the, you need to decide this, you need to decide this. This, all sort of the technical things that you folks out there that have got the great American railroad story, just looking for the right way to get it into ink, this would be a program for you. So with that in mind, normally I'd be turning it over to my guest. Our guest today is Dr. Frank Scheer of the Railway Mail Service in Boyce, Virginia. But because of Dr. Scheer's schedule, we pre-recorded the program for broadcast at this time. It's premiering today, but I've got good news because I do like live programming. We've got Steve Howes of the Sumter Valley Railroad. Hang on here. I'm just trying to unpin myself so that we can share a screen. There it is. And I'm going to turn it over to Steve Howes of the Sumter Valley Railroad. There's Steve. And let me do this. There you go. And Steve, take it away. Tell us about what's going on.
All right. Well, I'm kind of technically challenged. You might have to coach me through this, but we'll see if we can make it work.
Right.
Oh,
Look at you. You're better than your host, who probably should mute himself.
well, I've lost the picture now. Hang on.
Back to the drawing board.
We'll try this again.
Okay, so far so good.
So far, so good. Let's get
I'm
over
knocking
this.
on wood in the background, folks. Hey, look at that. And Steve, from the beginning, and tell us what's going on.
Okay, well, this past weekend I was over to Sumter Valley for our annual safety training weekend. All of our volunteers have to go through rules exam and safety training every other year. Some good news. I was over on Friday, and last year we took our 40-ton Heisler, which is pictured here, out of service, and it wasn't due to any boiler issues, but this locomotive is 110 years old, and this whole back tank was kind of rotting out, and we were really worried about having a catastrophic water loss. So we decided to take it out of service and rebuild this back section is the water tank, and it has just recently been completed, and it's pretty much ready to go. Um, for those of you that aren't familiar with Sumter Valley, if you really want to live your dream and become a steam locomotive engineer, this is one place where you can do it if you want to put in the time. And this particular locomotive is probably one of the easiest ones that you can learn on. It's easy to operate, simple. All the lube points are where you can get at them, and it's just a really nice piece of equipment to operate once it's going.
Now, Steve, if you could just, for the folks that aren't familiar, describe what some of the building is in the background and who the Eccles family was.
Okay, this large building on the left here is our back shop. It was built, I don't know, about 20 years ago, I guess. It's uh, it's got 3 tracks that go into it. It's got a pit. It's got room for another track on the far west side. And it's a pretty comprehensive shop that we've got. Um, the folks that you see here are some of our newer volunteers. We've been fortunate to find some new folks that are experienced in steam operations. And on Friday, they did the annual inspection for number 3, and it was pretty much ready to go. This shows our number 720 diesel electric 50-ton locomotive pulling the Heisler locomotive out of the shop, and they're heading over to the water tower to fill the thing up with water. And this shows the 720 pushing it back towards the water tank. And here it shows them filling the tank, and they'll wit up. And later in the afternoon, I wasn't there, but they did fire the locomotive up. It did have a small leak in the steam dome when it hit 145 pounds, but they said it would probably be an easy fix, and hopefully it'll be ready for, or I'm assuming it will be ready for the operating season, start of the operating season on Memorial Day weekend. Just one note of interest there, that flat car, number 501, is actually came from the Crown Zellerbach Camas mill operation. We got 5 of their old mill cars when Sumter Valley Railroad first got started. Of course, we do have locomotive number 19, and we've been fighting with issues in the FRA, trying to get the thing ready to put back together. The locomotive was taken out of service several years ago, not due to boiler issues. It still had time on it, but it started to pop a few flues, and it was more than what you could just plug. And so we decided at that time, let's go ahead and do a full tube replacement. And when we got ready to put it back together, some issues surfaced relative to welds that were made a number of years ago in the firebox door sheet. And I'm not an expert in all this, but we've been fighting with that. I think we've got the issues almost ready to be resolved. And once we get the thumbs up, we're going to go ahead and start putting the thing back together, which is kind of a big job in and of itself. It's got 241 tubes that need to be reinstalled and the boiler lagging and jacketing put back on, and a number of other things to get it ready. But hopefully it'll be ready sometime this summer to go back into service.
Fantastic.
This is inside the back shop. This yellow thing over here is the 10-ton Plymouth that we use mostly for shop switching. It also came from the Crown Zellerbach mill in Camas.
Oh.
And this green thing here is a 10-ton Davenport, I believe, and it's the original piece of Sumter Valley equipment. Over this past year, we invested almost $100,000 to get new roll-up doors on our car shop. This was the first building that was built at, well, it was actually constructed in Baker City during the restoration of the number 3. And then in 1971, it was reconstructed back up at Sumter. And it was showing its age. It was about ready to fall apart. And we decided to, since it was a historic building, invest in getting new siding, roof, and the roll-up doors put on. And so it does offer a good place to do car restoration work. I threw this one in for Jonathan. I think he's kind of partial to this locomotive, or said he was.
It's really cute.
It is. And this locomotive really saved our bacon this year, because after we took 3 out of service, it was really originally intended to just be a backup locomotive, but it pulled most of the passenger runs the last half of the season and the special runs during the holiday season, and it really saved our bacon.
Steve, on the 720, didn't it make its debut on one of your Christmas trains because 19 wasn't ready or something? Does that sound right?
That could be, given the fact that I'm not there all the time like I used to be. I couldn't really tell you for sure, but that sounds about right. A lot of times we get a bad rap just people say, well, there's nothing but rocks over there, but I think it really is a nice place to work. And if you look a little bit beyond the tracks, it is a beautiful country. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of sorry I left, but I had my future to think of with the government and my pension. So I did take a transfer. And
Can you tell us where this is on the railroad?
This is, well, these 4 tracks that you see here, this one here leads back to the restoration shop and our oil facility for the 19. And these 3 tracks are the ones that go to the back shop.
So this is in McEwen.
This is in McEwen. The depot and the water tank would be off to the right. And then lastly, I wanted to throw this in support of our friends there at Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad. I took this picture. It's probably close to 40 years ago, I think. And this is the bridge that burned. And this is I think it's the number 91 West Coast Special Heisler and the number 5 Porter 282 that they were, I think, are in the process of trying to get back in operation. And this was kind of a fun trip.
So just a note, if you were, put a note in the chat if you were also on this train, because it seems like to me, well, I was on this train, and and I think George Foster was on this train too. So thank you, Steve, and thank you for your support. We'll
Do you
see.
remember what year it was?
I want to say 88, wasn't it, George?
Something like that, because first time I met McCormick was in the Portland Union Depot Rail Fair in 87. That was November. So sometime after that, probably in the 88. Yeah. And we had a great time, but I have the other sort of the other side of the train after we got off the train and did the run by. So that looks good too. I've got the slide. Saw it the other day, so I've got to get it printed up.
Yeah, that was,
Yeah.
those were fun trips, man. Oh boy, those were fun. So, well, thanks, Steve. And you've unshared, and so I'm going to, let's see here. I want to remove pin, and
I
I'm
see another
going
George.
well, George Hardy, always good to see you, sir. Welcome to the audience. Well, glad you're here today. So, so back to live action. Today's program is a presentation on railway mail service by Dr. Frank Scheer, and it's been pre-recorded for broadcast at this time because Frank's volunteer sessions at the railway mail service are the exact same time as this program. So without further ado, if I get this to work, folks, here we go. And hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Jonathan Fisher, and you are at the May 7th, 2025 bi-weekly Zoom meeting for the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive in Dearborn, Washington. We are pre-recording this program today to be shown at this time. And so normally we don't do that, but in this case, to accommodate everybody's schedules, here we are. So just a couple of quick news items. We're coming to the end of our spring season of presentations that started back in January. We've got 3 left to go for this season. May 21st, Royal Gelder will be here talking about the reconstruction of the sunset. Yes, it's the Golden State Route. Thank you. Between Kansas City and Tucumcari, New Mexico. Southern Pacific took over from the Rock Island. June 4th, Robert W. Scott.
Jonathan, the audio is low.
Talking about rail train camera. Hang on, what was that, Wayne?
The audio is very low.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Jonathan,
Let me
doesn't
see what
sound
I
like
can
the
do.
audio.
Okay. Thank you for telling me.
Jonathan,
What's that?
Jonathan, it
Yes.
doesn't sound like the audio is coming through the main Zoom channel. I presume you're familiar when you share, there's an extra checkbox on the share screen that says share audio.
Oh, hang
You
on
need
here
to make sure
for a
you
second.
check
Make
that
sure I've
box.
done that. Thank you.
So you have to unshare and then reshare to get that option again.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Let me try that again. I appreciate. I don't do this very often, so normally we like to have live programming.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah, it's tricky when you're doing a
okay,
pre-recorded.
so now it says, now where do I find the,
Somewhere in the share dialog, usually on the right side, sometimes in the bottom right, it'll say there's a checkbox that's something about share audio.
let's see here, I appreciate your help with this. Advanced sharing options.
Yeah, not so much there, but after you click the share button and you get the screen in your face that asks which thing you want to share, it's part of
Yeah.
that it's part of that dialog box.
Okay, hang on, everybody. Let me try this one more time. Okay. I got share and I select the media player. Okay. And I hit, oh,
Before you hit share, there's a checkbox on the screen.
all righty. You've come to my rescue one more time. Folks, Kent just did a really cool, you want to take 5 seconds to talk about your map quick?
Oh, I can do that, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let me just say the only reason I know about this is I have had problems doing it myself, so happy to help.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Okay. So, do you happen to have that map handy? Do you want to put it up on the screen?
I am remote right now, but I may
Okay,
be
no
able
worries,
to
no
do
worries. I
that.
know that's too much putting too much putting you on the spot. Anyway, Kent does this really neat mapping project, and I if you like the Great Northern in the Pacific Northwest, like Bellingham, then this is a map for you.
Yeah,
So
I'll talk more about it later.
we'll talk more about it later. In the meantime, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Kent, let me know if this is working right this time. Thank you. Between Kansas City and Tucumcari, New Mexico, when the Southern Pacific took over from the Rock Island. June 4th, Robert W. Scott will be with us. Robert will be talking about rail fan cameras around the Pacific Northwest. Robert was instrumental in getting the rail fan camera set up at the depot in Chehalis, Washington, and has helped with the rail fan camera in Centennial, Washington, and also has been working with the rail fan camera in Ritzville, Washington. All of these are located on their respective depots. So Robert will be telling us about how this technology is evolving and how those of us that still like to watch trains can do it from the comfort of our own couch. June 18th will be our final program of the spring season. PNRA former board president Bob Kelly will be with us. It's kind of a cooking program again. We've had a couple cooking programs this season. Bob's program on June 18th will be about how to publish a railroad book. Bob recently published a real nice book on Argus cameras, and he's going to be talking about some of the behind the scenes that you budding authors out there will be interested in knowing about so that you can publish your own book. After that, we'll be taking a summer break and we'll be back again this fall. So today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Frank Scheer from the Railway Mail Service in Boyce, Virginia. Dr. Scheer, Frank, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I appreciate being here and looking forward to this opportunity to describe a little bit more about the Railway Mail Service out in your neck of the woods.
Fantastic. Well, why don't we do this? I'm going to mute and unpin myself. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the Railway Mail Service and some of the services that you provide and the things that, that are of interest to your institution. And then I'll just let you segue right into today's program.
That sounds great. Thank you very much, Jonathan. So the Railway Mail Service Library is a little different than most railroad historical societies or archives or railroad museums. No, there's no railway post office that is at the Railway Mail Service Library. The Railway Mail Service Library does own a highway post office, as well as a 1931 Ford mail truck. But no, there's no railroad equipment. Its home is what you see on the screen here, this 1913 Boyce Railway Depot. And Boyce is on the former Norfolk and Western Railway on a line that was between Hagerstown, Maryland and Roanoke, Virginia. It was originally the Shenandoah Valley Railroad. So it's got its own interesting history. And by the way, the name Boyce for the town was was established because of Upton L. Boyce, who lived about 2 miles from where the station is. And he was the vice president of the Shenandoah Valley Railroad and really the main proponent for getting it constructed. Boyce has its own history that I won't delve into, but the Railway Mail Service Library has a collection not just of the United States, but also Canadian, British, German, Norwegian, Finnish, and several other countries' history of how they used to sort mail on trains. And it's also, unlike an archives, it's strictly periodicals and primary source publications. It does have some interesting artifacts, not well established right now to set up as a museum, where you can go in and look at it, but they're there. And one of the main activities, if you're interested more in this, I can put you on the mailing list. On the back side of the station from the side that you're seeing here, the Railway Mail Service Library owns land, and a new archival building will be constructed, because one of the problems with any building, if it's an archives, is that there's too many windows. See, there's lots of windows in this station, and that lets in sunlight, and sunlight is not really the best friend of historical documents. This building is also not climate controlled. It's not cost effective at this time to try to keep it air conditioned or heated year round. So a new archival building that's custom built and adapted for the specific purpose of preserving the material and the vehicles is what is needed. And that's the current project going forward. But for now, this is the home of the Railway Mail Service Library. So, why am I interested in train time at Wallace, Idaho on May 31st, 1951? Well, that's answered. Well, first of all, I'll tell you what we're going to talk about. This presentation has basically 6 parts. It talks about the Wallace and Spokane Railway Post Office route, and specifically how that relates to Wallace, Idaho. Then we talk about using primary source information from railroad post office schedules and schemes to learn more about what the service was that was performed by that route. You can also refer to post route maps and show segments, for example, of Shoshone County in Idaho, to understand exactly how the route was and where the post offices were located that this route supported. We'll talk briefly about railway post office postmarks, because for many people, that's one of the great parts about railway post office history is it left tangible evidence that people can collect. And there's many people who are postal historians and cover collectors that like to focus on railway post office postmarks. So we're going to talk about those briefly. And this is one of the reasons why I call the building that you see behind me, if you're looking at the little thumbnail view of me talking, it's at the crossroads of railroad history and post office heritage. And you know what happens at a grade crossing. You want to wait for the train, but that's where the two meet. And that's exactly what the Railway Mail Service Library is. Now, from one of the covers, we can actually learn a little bit more about one of the railway postal clerks that was assigned to this route. And so it's not often, but in some cases, it's worth exploring some genealogy to learn more about that person. And by that time, we will have consumed probably close to an hour. If I can shorten it up, I will. And we'll talk about a brief summary just to cap it off. And I will show at the very end my contact information, so that if you do have questions, since I can't entertain them during the course of the presentation or afterwards from this recording, if you've got a question, send me a note, or maybe we can schedule something later on where we do like a mini Zoom meeting of sorts, and we just do a question and answer about railway mail service. So this is what started all of it. This photograph turned up, and it's a great view of the Union Pacific Station at Wallace, Idaho. We have a train, I believe it's just pulled in from Spokane, Washington. And so it's collected milk cans along the way. And so Standard Dairy at Wallace, Idaho is unloading those from the baggage portion of the railway post office car. There's another truck, a box truck beyond it, which I think is unloading Star Route mail that's going to take it to other post offices. And of course, you could see this person stepping out of the railway post office car underneath the catcher arm. And we'll talk about that person a little bit later on. But this is a very engaging photograph from the standpoint of research. The best part about research is when you know where something is, you know when it was, and you can develop a story from that. And that is basically what we're going to do in this presentation. Now, one other thing too, I don't know if it's a mine or if it's the local fire department, but if you look above the Union Pacific car that has the railway post office there, you see a bell, and it looks like there's like a watchman's shanty up above where maybe they can keep an eye for wildfires or any fires in town. I've not looked at a map of Wallace and seen exactly how the town was laid out. My understanding is everything you see in this photograph doesn't exist anymore. apparently Interstate 90 now goes through this area and has completely demolished everything that you see. So that's another reason why history, especially when it's recorded in photographs, is very important. One other thing I want to mention before I proceed with really the rest of the presentation. I've only been to Idaho one time, and my understanding is the correct pronunciation for any town is the way the local people pronounce it. And using an example here in Virginia, there's a town named that's named Staunton. People in Virginia call it Stanton. When I was working for the Norfolk and Western Railway in Illinois, there was a Staunton there, and the local people called it Staunton. So my pronunciations are not going to be always accurate from this perspective of the locale. Please indulge with me that, if you're aware of these cities and towns, if I don't get it right, well, just chalk that up to my not being aware of the local pronunciation. But they're all spelled out, so at least you know what I'm talking about and you know where we are. So this is what prompted it all, this photograph here. And we're going to then unravel the history about this photograph, May 31st, 1951, almost, here we are at the beginning of May 7th. And, you add 3 weeks of that and subtract a year, it's like 74 years ago. You are looking through a window into the past. And too bad that we can't open that window or a door next to it and go back out and stand there ourselves, as well as be able to see it in color. And I guess that also the Union Pacific color scheme at that time was the gray color scheme, not the what it's known for with the yellow. So let me give you some background now. I had done a presentation for this group probably over a year ago, and I talked about exactly what a railway post office was and what the railway mail service was. So next few slides is sort of to refamiliarize people with the purpose of what a railway post office is. And its purpose was that it allowed for mail to be sorted between an origin and destination. And sorting it between origin and destination before it got to a post office usually meant that there was going to be faster delivery. The Postal Service, for about the last 30 or 40 years, they've adopted a much different structure for mail processing and distribution. So, what existed then really produced a much better service in an era when mail communications were really needed. People didn't necessarily have telephones in 1951. If they did, they were very expensive. They were charging for each local call. A long distance, if you were trying to call the East Coast, you'd have to call an operator and they would have to set up the call by going to the next operator, then the next operator. They'd get the information who you wanted to call. You'd hang up, you wait about a half an hour, and finally that operator would call back after they've patched you through several portions of the communications network so that you could actually speak to whoever you wanted. And it was very expensive for those calls. So telegrams were expensive too. So as a result, mail, especially first-class mail and postcards, were the real source of quick and private communications between people. But let's not overlook that newspapers and parcel posts were also very, very important to the public. Now, something that people may not realize is that during inclement weather, in the earlier days of airmail, airports were often shut down because of fog, wind, sometimes high winds, snow, inclement weather of all kinds. And if that was the case, then the airmail was actually diverted back to the railway post office network to keep it moving. And of great importance to banks and individuals of financial means and other services, registered mail, which was a service of first class, that provided a very secure means of transporting mail for very valuable things. People realized, may not realize, that all the currency that moved between the Federal Reserve branches at one time was moving as registered mail between the branches. And all the gold that's in Fort Knox, all the gold that was in the U.S. mints at San Francisco, Denver, and Philadelphia, and back when they had a mint down in New Orleans and Carson City, all that silver and gold was also moving as registered mail. Sometimes the raw ingots and then the coin as well as currency coming out of those mints. So with that, now a lot of people believe or may have the mistaken impression that railway postal clerks were railroad employees. No, they were all post office employees. And they were not the same as a railway express messenger. So they were all strictly post office. And the trip length, especially for the Spokane and Wallace, was about 130 miles one way. Average trips for a lot of clerks sometimes were much longer. Sometimes it was as much as 300 or 400 miles. And in that, comparing it to railway services, of course, locomotive engineers and firemen had the 100-mile rule, so they were changing every 100 or so miles as a day's pay. And train crews sometimes went maybe twice that distance. But a railway postal clerk, if they were assigned to a route that was, let's say, 400 miles long, they were on that route the entire time, standing up. Plus that, a railway postal clerk would do what's called advance time. Before the car even left the origin terminal, they had about an hour or two where the car was standing there. The clerks would go in, they'd set it all up for the trip. They would hang the racks with all the sacks and pouches. They put in their headers into the distribution cases so that they knew what cells were what separations of mail. And they actually, before the train even left, would start working mail and sometimes even make a dispatch back to the transfer clerk at that origin terminal before the train even left town. So that was very important. And then, of course, if the clerk had the mail work, they took a break or they ate. A lot of times you'd have a sandwich on the counter if you're standing up. You take a bite of it now and you take a bite of it then. And it was only for the Wallace, Spokane and Wallace, one of the nice things was when it basically left from Spokane in the morning, arrived in Wallace around noontime with about a 2-hour layover, as we'll see in some of the schedules. And then while the car was there, the clerk basically had it all set up. They probably didn't have that much to work as far as mail before the return trip. So they could rest a little bit. They could have lunch. They might even get out of the car and go to a local lunch counter if there was one close to the station. So anyway, there were no breaks. It wasn't like work today where you get a 15-minute break every 2 hours or 4 hours, and you get a half-hour lunch break. It was just solid work, and you had breaks or took a break when you could if the mail allowed. So here we are back with this picture. Now we're going to delve into greater detail about this photograph. And there's what I'm going to do is show you, I think, a couple pictures that show what is inside of that car. So let me just back up one. So if you go there, you see the car. The railway post office portion was the left end of this car that you see in its entirety where the clerk is stepping out of it. That was the railway post office apartment. It was 15 feet of space, and it went up to about where you see it stopped before that next window. There were two windows next to the door, and then it stopped before it got to that third window. The rest of the car was all baggage. Okay. So they had some windows for lighting in the car, but that was not part of the railway post office space. So getting to this slide, except for the fact that it's only showing one window on each side instead of two, this is basically what the inside floor layout was. So it was very compact space, only one person worked there. And the letter mail was worked at the boxes that you see sort of facing along the right side of this image. They were called distribution cases. Then you had on the floor level next to it, you had sacks and pouch racks, and that was on both sides. And then above it, you had overhead boxes. There were 5 overhead boxes on each side. That just allowed more separations for, let's say, newspapers or so on like that. The item closest to the middle of the car was a distribution table. It was a movable table. You could take it down, you could put it up if you didn't need it. And then the left side, lower left corner, that's called the bins. And that is where mail would be stacked that needs to be worked or had already been worked and was waiting for dispatch at whatever town it was going to go off at. There's 4 doors here. There's one at the northeast, south, and west. The door on either side of the car is the main entry or access or regress from the car. And then at the left, there's an end door that was secured by a bolt so that if you had to get into a storage mail car or other equipment on the other side, you could unlock that and go in. It was unlocked from the inside. You could not go to that door and get in from the outside. There's a small thing at the right that says creep door 2 feet, 0 inches. That was underneath the table. And it was just a little crawl space that, again, opened up only from inside of the railway post office car. But in this case, it went into the baggage section. And it was, all of this was emergency exits. If the car turned over on its side, it had some sort of an accident. There was more than one way to get out of the car, no matter where you were in the car. You weren't just locked in. So this is pretty much the working space of this particular railway post office. And the thing that I want to mention is that whether it's a railway post office car on the main line or another branch line that maybe had twice this amount of space, they all have basically the same fixtures. They just had more of them. And the other thing that I want to mention, I guess, you will see where if you look at the top and bottom, it says letter chute. I'm going to back up to the previous photograph, and I think I show this anyway. If you see where it says on the side of the car where the clerk's stepping out, you see U.S. Mail Railway, and then you see this little rectangular thing. That is the letter slot. So you could be standing on the platform. You can mail a letter on the railway post office. It went down a little chute down to a tray on the floor, and the clerk would postmark it on there. And that's where many railway post office postmark covers how they got the postmark for the railway post office on there. 99% of the mail that was sorted on a railway post office was never postmarked in the railway post office. You had to hand it to the letter to a clerk, or you had to put it through the letter chute, or at some stations there were street letter boxes or letter collection boxes that were on the platform, and at those stations the clerk would get off and retrieve the mail from it and also postmark it. So Those were the ways in which you got a railway post office postmark on a letter. So we're going to shift now to schemes and schedules. A scheme is an arrangement of information about how mail reached a particular post office. A schedule shows when it got there. So distribution schemes have been issued every 4 years, 4 to 6 years, and ever since about 1877 and up until about 1960. Then they started making some very big changes. Schemes had basically three parts. One, first of all, they had a listing of all the post offices as well as the county that it was in. And all the post offices are grouped by county within the body of the scheme. So if you don't know what city or town what county a city or town is in, you wanted to look at that first part. It was sort of like at the index, except they put the index up at the front. Then you got the county listing of post offices, and it's grouped by the mail supplies. Mail supplies means which railway post office or star route or mail messenger or other conveyance got the mail to that post office. You know, it's got to get there somehow. And for the era that we're talking about, it was still primarily railway post offices. And then also, it also, at the back of it, which talks about how mail is separated. Mail, when it went to a railway post office, was divided into number 1 mail, number 2 mail, or number 3 mail, or maybe even number 4 mail. And the reason for doing that was a post office knew that the clerk was going in a particular direction of travel and what the towns were that were coming up soon after their pouch was open. The number 1 mail meant that it had to be worked first. Then the mail that was number 2 mail could be held back and then worked later before they worked number 3 mail. It was just a way to try to improve the efficiency so that the clerk would not bypass a post office or a station without having worked the appropriate mail for that. And if it did, there was still a way to get the mail back to the post office, but it incurred a delay. And delay is at one time in the postal service, post office department, delay was considered to be a bad word. So now the information in schemes are routings, and this is what clerks have to learn. I'm going to talk about that more when I get to a schedule. These clerks had to learn so much, and they were in a after 1954 they became loose leaf instead of being bound. The bound copies are much nicer from the standpoint of research today. Because even if there are changes, you can figure out what probably was in effect during a particular year. And when you have a loose leaf scheme or a loose leaf schedule, they were throwing away a page at a time. Most clerks did not save them. And so, you know, if you're trying to find a particular date or a particular year, and that page is on it's on a page that was discarded in the trash can, you don't have much to work with. Now, the next screen talks about the post offices that are served by the Wallace and Spokane. And what it is, I'll go ahead and transfer there. What we're doing one sample county, and it's Shoshone County. So these are all the post offices in Shoshone County that receive mail from the Wallace and Spokane and where the mail was dispatched by. Now, if you look at Milan, mail was being made up directly by Spokane and sent by this route over the Wallace and Spokane to get there. Same thing with Missoula, Montana. But, you know, then you get down to where it's Enaville, Kingston, Osborne, Silverton, Smelterville. Wallace and Spokane made up those dispatches directly to those post offices. So the rationale, and this is that last part with the separations, going east which is going towards Wallace, Idaho. Then it's out of Spokane. The number one mail was at Tekoa, and then Cataldo was the next break, and then Wallace. So, you know, if all the mail for stations up to Tekoa worked first, and then the clerk would start working on the mail between Tekoa and Cataldo, then from Cataldo to Wallace. So it was pretty well organized. So let's get to a schedule. Now, originally, the railway mail service was originally organized in 6 divisions. And they actually numbered them all, beginning with number 1 in 1877 for those 6 divisions. The 13th division, which is where Idaho, Oregon, Washington, that was formed out of the 8th division, and in 1909 was split off as you know, the railroad mileage in the Pacific Northwest, as well as population grew and the number of post offices grew. So it was important that they went ahead and set up a separate division, and that was based in Seattle. So, as I mentioned already, the schedules of mail routes were originally hardbound. They were periodicals that came out about 2 or 3 times a year as a bound volume, and then they transitioned to loose leaf. And it's easier for me to do research from the 1930s about how mail moved than it is in the 1960s or even 1970s. This is just one portion of a schedule, and it has several features. First of all, it's got the name of the railway post office. Now, that star that is to the left of Wallace indicates that it had, the clerk was equipped with a registered mail key, so they could handle registered mail pouches. And then it gets to it talks about the name of the railroad company, the distance, and a breakdown for various portions of the run. They were subdivided into routes usually. So everything revolved out of Spokane. The train 67 left at 8:15 in the morning, and it went to Wallace, arriving at 1 o'clock. Then it had about an hour and 15-minute layover, and then it came back and was back in Spokane at 6:50. So basically, one clerk would go out and come back all in the same day. Now, you could not do this every day of the week. You actually had 2 clerks assigned to this run, plus maybe an occasional substitute clerk, where one clerk would make the run one day, or maybe in 2 days in succession. Then they'd swap off with somebody else that did it for 1 or 2 days. And you go like that, and they went through a cycle, and then each of those clerks ended up getting a week off. So you did not have one single clerk, even though it was a daily round trip. That's what the little letter A means daily, including Sunday. They were not necessarily working every day. Now, below the schedule table, it has 15 feet. That's the size of the space that was authorized for the trains going over. That's the size of the car that was in the photograph. What's important for a lot of people to recognize, it says mails work. That one clerk that was in the car at any given time, whoever it was, had to know on the train going towards Wallace, Idaho, they were sorting Idaho mail, Montana mail, and Washington mail. They had to do case examinations and learn the mail routings for every post office in those states. So let's say Idaho had 800 post offices. Montana had maybe 1,000 post offices. Perhaps Washington State had at that time maybe 1,200 or more post offices. Well, that alone, you're over 2,000 post offices that they had to know for each one how to route the mail. But it gets even better. You come back on train 68, you're working different mail. That's the important thing for people to recognize about railway post offices is the direction that they're going in, the time of day, if there's more than one trip, the connections they're making. They don't all work the same mail. Not all the clerks have the same assignment. So coming back, they're working Alberta, British Columbia, as well as Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, Washington, and then they throw in Wyoming. So you got, they may not have had to necessarily put up mail for everything in Alberta and British Columbia. Chances are what they do is send it to one of the connecting lines that would take it up to the boundary and across the boundary into Canada, such as that this is further east, but Winnipeg, for example, or up to Vancouver, Washington. Whatever a railway post office route was going to those kinds of cities, they give it to them, and those were the clerks that really knew the mail for the connections on the Canadian railway post office side of how to send the mail. But so North Dakota, Wyoming, a couple of new states. Clerks had to know every post office in Wyoming and in North Dakota. A good railway postal clerk knew the distribution for as much as 10,000 different post offices. That had to all be memorized. And it had to be memorized so that they could be examined on each of those states individually at different times. They didn't do them every day, or I'm sorry, in one examination. They did not go in and do all of the states at one time. They just had to go do an examination for one state, and that was staggered throughout the year. But they had to do it with 97% accuracy. You failed if you got 96%. There's not very many bars these days that set that high for manual labor or for intellectual acumen. Now, what I also want to stress is, oh yeah, 97%, that sounds really great. That means out of every 100 letters, you're making 3 mistakes. A typical clerk on the Wallace and Spokane probably sorted about 1,000 mail pieces during the course of the trip. And so out of 1,000, they're making 30 mistakes. It's only human to make mistakes. But there was sort of this self-correction within the railway mail service that I think is very important. The next clerk got it. Oh, they said, oh, this shouldn't have come to me. This was supposed to have been dispatched someplace else. So you had somebody else who was doing 97% or better on their examinations. They correct it and get that letter going the direction that it needed to be going. And you went through a series of these steps. So you had a sort of a self-correcting system within the railway mail service. A letter might get handled 3 or 4 times, maybe more if it was going cross country. And so, and of course, some of the clerks actually scored more than just 97%. There's quite a few clerks that got 100% on their case examinations. That doesn't mean that they couldn't still make a mistake now and then, but that usually occurred because the letter was hard to read. Some people have really terrible handwriting. So anyway, that's most of what I want to cover in this, but I will touch upon, if you look at train 67, most of the dispatches that are appearing on that left side are to individual post offices, and they go off at a particular station name. Then coming back, going towards Spokane, most of these are not going to post offices. They're making connections with for example, the airmail field at Spokane for airmail flights, Miles City and Seattle West Division, Train 1, Spokane and Portland, Train 19, Spokane, Washington Terminal, Wallace and Spokane, Train 67. That would be a go back if they carried a letter past where it should be, and it's going to go back the next day. Williston and Seattle, West Division, Train 27, Williston and Seattle Middle Division, Train 2. The railway mail service was an interconnected network. We're talking about just one railway post office route and one that's a branch line. But you see, it was part of national network, as were all these other routes. They performed as a web across the country. And the trouble is, when you start breaking that web and removing some of the links, then the whole web becomes weaker. So let's move on to the next slide. Now, not every station is shown in a railway mail service schedule. A railway mail service schedule only shows junctions, major cities, the origin, the destination. So sometimes you need to go back out to a railroad publication, a public timetable, in this case, a railroad official guide. And their benefit is that they show you all the stations en route. They give you some mileages that's good to work with. And you've got times here, and it shows that some of these are flag stops. The train didn't stop, but it shows you basically, if you compare the information in the previous slide with this one, the times match. And I want to mention one other thing. Let me go back to the previous slide. Where you see the colons there, in like 604, 610, 641, it doesn't exist for these other times. Freeman, Washington's 850, 820 at NP Crossing. NO stands for no office. Those are places where there was a nonstop mail exchange. That's where the clerk was using that catcher arm. So if you look over here, you can see, for example, Manitou, Washington, did not have a catch going back towards Spokane at 6:04 in the evening. It did stop going towards Wallace in the morning. So we look at Manitou here, and you'll see that going back towards Spokane, it was a flag stop. It made a stop going towards Wallace, so there was no need to make a catch. But since it was a flag stop going back, train might not stop, it would dispatch mail. Were there other flag stops such as O'Hare, Black Lake, Enaville? There may have been mail cranes there too, but if a clerk had a pouch and wasn't picking up any mail from that location, they may have just thrown off a pouch, even though the train didn't stop. Of course, now, if they had something like baby chicks, which were very fragile, even if it was a flag stop, the clerk, knowing that they are not going to stop, let's say at Dudley, they will pull the signal cord to the engineer, pull it a couple times to stop at the next station, or maybe it was 3 times. And the conductor didn't necessarily like that because there are no passengers getting on or off, but the engineer knew they had to stop because of the mail. And so they would stop long enough that you would hand somebody the crate of baby chicks, because let me tell you, you don't throw a crate of baby chicks out the door at about 30 miles an hour. And yeah, on this train, it was moving at about 25 to 35 miles an hour most of the way. Not a tremendous speed, not like a mainline passenger train, but it was enough to do some damage. So, I want to talk briefly about post route maps. This is another important primary resource for historians, sometimes even railroad historians, even though most railroad historians don't even know they exist. These show the location of every post office. It shows every railroad and highway post office and airmail route and all of this information all on a map. And the map is usually 48 inches by about 48 inches, sometimes as much as 60 inches. They are very large. When you scan them, they're even at 300 dots per inch. They're big. You know, the file that I was working with for this Idaho map is about 60 megabytes, just so that when I wanted, for example, show the route here, that it's got high enough resolution that I can take out a small portion of it and show you that little segment. So this is the entire route for the Spokane, the Wallace and Spokane. Spokane's at the left. And then you can see how the line goes to Manitou, then down to Toccoa, and then comes back up and winds its way through the mountains, through Kellogg and Osborne, and ends up at Wallace. It doesn't go past Wallace, although maybe there was originally a rail line that went a little further to Milan. I'm not sure. And you see that there's a fish hatchery there. And that squiggly line between Montana and Idaho, that's the top of a mountain ridge. So unless you were going to invest money in this particular branch line and build a tunnel through there, and maybe several tunnels to try to get through that area, most of your mainline traffic was going from Spokane up towards the north and then across some passes that were a little bit more amenable to rail transportation. So this is the overall portion that I wanted to show you. If you, we're going to take 3 segments just so that you can see it in greater detail. Again, at high resolution, you can clip out a little bit. So you're leaving Spokane, you go through Dishman, Washington, you come down towards Manitou. There, the track splits. You have the option of going sort of southwest, or you have the option of going due south. And in this particular case, the line goes straight south. It goes down, I guess this is the Oregon short line, and that's following a river in reality. Goes down to Toccoa and then starts winding its way back towards the northeast, and all these towns in between. Every single one of these names here, it's significant because it's a post office. There could be other place names and so on like that that are not post offices. If you look in Benewah County, you see St. Joe there, sort of to the right of the screen. It's got a little triangle. St. Joe, that triangle means that it's a discontinued post office. But sometimes clerks were still receiving mail for a discontinued post office. So they'd still have to know where the mail was to go there, and then what the post office was it's now serving. There's something else that's important for you to realize from the standpoint of 2025. If you're listening to the news, they're talking about, oh, the Postal Service is going to change the mail frequency. They're going to cut back service. It's going to take longer for the mail. Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa is us. Well, you go back 50 years. Let's go back 100 years. Mail was not delivered every day. That's only a recent thing. If you look down below the word, big letters, Benewah, you're seeing in parentheses 3 TAW. That route means 3 times a week. Other routes were operating daily except Sunday, but there's a few instances on these maps where you can see that the service was not necessarily every day. And there were some places way back when in Nevada and elsewhere, the mail only went once a week, especially up in Alaska. And sometimes during the winter, no times a week. So this idea about universal service, got to have it there 6 days a week, gotta do it. No, that's not postal history. And if people would take a step back and look at history, they would realize that maybe for the people that are getting advertising mail, maybe do they really need to get it daily? You know, can they get by with 3 times a week? United Parcel Service does not necessarily deliver to every address every day. It waits until it's got enough packages for that route that the address is on. And you know, if the Postal Service adopted that kind of a strategy, it would not be losing billions or tens of billions of dollars every year. Because at the same time that the mail volume is declining for each address, the Postal Service adds about 1 million new addresses every year. So what is thinning out is getting even thinner and thinner and thinner, and it's not a workable economic stream. Mr. Fisher is an accountant. He knows, somewhere all the way your overhead costs are going to catch up with you and you allocate them as well as you can. But if the income's not there to support it, you're going to lose money. So, but I wanted to point that out since that's on the map. 3 times a week, not necessarily every day. And that's back in 1951. This is the last portion of that segment over to Wallace, so that you can see where the fish hatchery is. That's not necessarily, I think, a post office, but maybe it was. But the larger words like names like Burke, Jim, Silverton, Graham, and so on like that, those were post office names. Now here we have a 4 times a week, and it's only from May 1 to October 31st. You're in the mountains. When it's summertime, you're going to get mail. After October 31st, it's not 4 times a week. And of course, sometimes it was more than just 7 days a week. Burke had 12 times a week. Basically, it was 6 days. You have Monday through Saturday, and you're probably making 2 trips every day to get to Burke. That was a big enough town. Wallace, of course, was a county seat. So, county seats are a special place in geography because you got the courthouse there, you got attorneys, it's the financial center for the county. And as a result, most of your passenger traffic at that time, most of your mail traffic, express traffic was going to some of these other mines along the way, but Wallace was where the action was. You really had to support Wallace. And that was the purpose of this route. That's why it existed for as long as it did. I'm not going to talk about this screen. One of the things that will happen is that Mr. Fisher will provide to people notes pages. The notes pages for this presentation have everything that you see on the screen, plus there's information below the screen that explains what that screen has. It's a PDF file. So there's things that I may have skipped over. There's supplemental information. There's additional photographs that are in the notes pages. It's intended to be a reference for you so that you have maybe a better, more complete picture beyond just what I'm able to cover in the amount of time that's allotted. But the most important date here is that it's discontinued September 15th, 1955. And oh yeah, by the way, I was 4 years old then. It's a long time ago. So we're going to look at some covers. Now, again, the nice thing about collecting covers is if you like a particular railroad or you're interested in a particular train and it had a railway post office, Mr. Fisher was talking about, for example, the Rock Island, the Golden State Route, Kansas City and Tucumcari. That was a major railway post office route. You could have tangible, affordable artifacts from a specific train. And not quite the same as lanterns or locks or keys or all this other pocket watches, all the things that people like to collect for railroadiana. But, here you are. You've got a cover. It's from a mining company at Wallace, Idaho. That alone is interesting. That's local history. That's a business in Wallace, Idaho. It's postmarked on the Wallace and Spokane RPO going west, which means that it's going back towards Spokane back in 1907. And it's addressed to somebody in Hollywood, California. Don't know who Alfred Rush is in Hacienda Park, but it was received on September 3rd. So this is a little long transportation time, but I had to make quite a few connections. It had to basically go back over towards Seattle probably, and then started going down the coast all the way down to Hollywood, California. And of course, there could have been weather delays, although in September and October, probably not so many. But the nice thing is that a cover is something that you can hold in your hand that was on a specific train. And that's the appeal for cover collecting for railway post offices. This is a good example. Now, here's another one. There was a clerk, William Colon. I can't pronounce it because there's too many vowels in there. Colon, who was at the Penn Terminal Railway Post Office. He was a cover collector, but he was a supervisor at Penn Terminal back in the 1930s, and he got interested in the whole railway post office network. So he was making up cards and sending them around the country and getting clerks to go ahead and postmark them and send them back to him. He built a very, very nice collection, which has been dispersed. No one person owns his entire collection. You'll see his name occasionally turning up on eBay if you're searching for covers. But this is a later style of postmarker that was used. This particular one was made by a company called International Postal Supply in Brooklyn, New York. They only made postmarkers for a couple of years. Most of everything else is Pitney Bowes, and I didn't mention it, but this one here was made by a shop in Virginia called the Chambers Shop, and they were in existence for almost through 3 family generations until about 1931. So this one here is a more common one. This is what was in existence at the very end. Nice clear postmark. This is probably the cover. The postmark, even though it's dated 1955, probably dates to the mid to late 1930s. And it shows both going out to Wallace and returning from Wallace back to Spokane, both on there. This is called an accommodation cover for a collector. Merwin Lead also put together a great cover collection. Sadly, he's not with us. But on the back side, there was a note penciled by the clerk. It says, line safe as RPO for another year, may HPO, or may make it a highway post office at that time. The name is Sutherland. Now, we know that in 1955, a few months after this cover was sent, that it was discontinued. It didn't make it another year. So that makes that very interesting. And this, like I say, the postmarker that made that impression was made in Stamford, Connecticut by Pitney Bowes. Now, when you get a name like Sutherland, not Wilson or Miller or Jones, it starts opening the opportunity that maybe you can really do some genealogical research. You can probably find out more. Sutherland is not a real common name. And even though you don't know the first and middle name, Sutherland, you look around, see what Sutherlands lived in Spokane. It was likely that the person lived in Spokane because they certainly didn't live in Wallace, because they would have had to deadhead all the way over to Spokane every day and then travel back. So chances are they lived in Spokane. Had 2 pieces of information to work with. Go to ancestry.com. It unlocks the door for one of the clerks who was assigned to this run. Now, this is a World War I registration card, and it mentions in there that he's works for the Postal Service or Post Office Department, and the chief clerk of the Railway Mail Service in the Federal Building at Spokane, Washington, knows where he is. The signature is within eye shot of what the pencil signature is. That's another nice feature about this. So it was enough to identify him. And then what happened to him? He died in 1969, and it says on his certificate of death that he was a retired supervisor of Railway Post Office, and gives his address, wife's name, all of this. There's so much that you can really go into and really start learning more about the person. He was 69 when he died. In the picture, 1951, he was in his 50s. So anyway, we've reached the summary. this is getting towards the end of this presentation, and what I want to convey to you is, first of all, we started out with a photograph that did identify a location. It did identify a date. The train can be determined. And from all of that, you can write a story. You can do the research. The primary sources are there to find out more about the background of that picture. And, now the Railway Mail Service Library doesn't buy photographs just to try to increase their value. If you just buy the photograph, oh, it's a nice picture of a UP train, can't see the locomotive. That's a showstopper for a lot of people. If you can't see the locomotive, well, who wants that picture? To me, this one has where all the action is. It's the reason for the train, express, mail, passengers, not the locomotive. You don't run a locomotive up and down the track just for the fun of running locomotives. And that's an important thing for railroad historians to remember. It's not the steamage. It's the train behind the steamage that counts. So anyway, I will say that by doing the research about this specific photograph, oh no, I don't own it. I harvested that off. I'm a bad boy. I'm really a bad boy. Saw that on eBay. It was high enough resolution. They didn't put watermarks all over it. Ooh, I am so bad. I stole something. But you know what? I could write a story about it. And whoever got that photograph, they're lucky, and maybe they're better off if they ever find out that I wrote the story about their photograph so that they know really everything about it. So this is possible for any photograph. It's possible for any cover. You have a cover, you have a photograph, you know where it is, when it was. Come talk to me. I'll help you. And that is the story of the Railway Mail Service and the Railway Mail Service Library, which seeks to preserve the history of the Railway Mail Service. And so this is where we would do questions and answers. I'm going to skip over this slide and put this up here. And I'm going to leave it up here so that you can find the information to reach me. And yes, there's also another email address that I personally have. It's f_Scheer, SCHEER, @yahoo.com. Make sure that when you are sending an email to me that you got that C in there. It's not SHEER. Got to have the C, otherwise it's going to go to Never Never Land in the internet. So with that, Mr. Fisher, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and we'll see where we go from here. Shall I stop sharing, or do you want me to?
No, I think that's fine. Let's just leave this up here while we wrap up today's program, Frank, and that way people will have opportunity to, get your contact information. So, this is a great program. That's why I invite you back, because every time you've got an interesting presentation for our audience. And so this is really cool. I am going to, just as a note, I'm going to be referring this presentation to the Union Pacific Historical Society, because this would be something that would be of interest to them as well. And you've done a ton of work here, and the more people that can look at this great story, the better we all are for it. So there you go. So tell us, as we're wrapping up, some of the things that you've been working on this year for the Railway Mail Service in Boyce, Virginia, some of the projects you've been working on, I imagine presentations and programs and stuff like that.
Okay, I'll do that. And I'll also invite people to send me a note at the email addresses I mentioned, because I'll put you on the mailing list. You don't have to wait for the next time I make a presentation to tell you what's going on. The Railway Mail Service Library Foundation was established in 2017 to preserve the collection. And even though the train station that appears behind me, if you're able to see my thumbnail view, or was in the first slide of this presentation, the title slide, that's a great station. There's a separate foundation to preserve the station. It's called the Boyce Railway Depot Foundation. Both are worthy of preservation. It's going to be two separate groups, two separate areas of interest for preserving that. Of course, when I go to Boyce, I might be working on one or the other. The big achievement for the Railway Mail Service Library Foundation is, number one, it owns a building, a two-story house that's divided into two apartments that can be used. The downstairs floor can be used as an office. That's really what's envisioned as like a reading room for anybody that wants to come actually to Boyce and do research. If they want to stay overnight, the idea is that there'll be an apartment there in the same building. You know, they could spend 2 or 3 days there, wouldn't have to check into a motel. But what's enticing about that particular property is that it owns about another half acre behind it. And the Railway Mail Service Library received a bequest from Paul Nagel, who was president of the National Postal Transport Association during the 1950s. I knew him. I've recorded his recollections. He died shortly after achieving his 100th birthday, and he opted to bequest 80% of his residual estate to the Railway Mail Service Library Foundation, with the idea that its mission is to preserve and present the history of the Railway Mail Service and successor entities for future generations. That's a mission that I take seriously, because a lot of clerks gave me things. Cleaned out their basements, cleaned out their attics. They didn't want to see it going in the trash can. I don't want to see it going in the trash can either. It's got to have a better future than that. So, at the same time, there's only so much one person can do during the course of a lifetime, or even several people as a team working together as volunteers within a lifetime. So he left a bequest that paid for the building, that paid for the lot, the paid for the site plan, which that took 3 years of engineering to come up with a site plan for this new building. Then it took another 3 years to just do the site preparation, where you're going in and excavating, breaking up rock, putting in sidewalks, putting in other things that I didn't think were needed, such as a fire hydrant, some additional parking spaces, improving a driveway, and such and so, that burned up a lot of money. Altogether, the expenditures total $450,000 for that. And there's no building standing there right now, but it's ready to build. It's on property that's owned by the Railway Mail Service Library Foundation. There is no debt. There's no mortgage. Everybody is a volunteer. There's no paid salaries. So, one thought is, yeah, you can chase after grants and so on like that. Yeah, well, I'll work on that a little bit. But you see, right now, what's going on in our country, a lot of nonprofit foundations are having tough times. Museums, this is not a good time for a museum. The benefactors are under a squeeze because the assets they have had in stocks and other assets, they're not going up. A lot of uncertainty. And also, as a result, I'm focusing on people who are my age or older, who may not have any heirs, or who have an affiliation or an interest in the Railway Mail Service Library that's able to donate some money. And so that's really the next step. But the bigger, more important step, even before money, is Mr. Fisher and I were talking about this before we started the recording, is a whole issue about succession planning. Somebody's got to fill my shoes and fill this shirt that I'm sitting here in. Somebody has to be the secretary, somebody has to be the treasurer, we need I've got people who are president, vice president, and so on like that, and board of directors. But the most critical people are secretary and treasurer. During the course of the year coming, I need to try to identify somebody that can take the membership records, the accounting records, take it all over. I'll be glad to assist them for the rest of my life, but we got to do this when it's a lot easier to do it when I'm living than when I'm dead. So that is really the next step. If you do request a newsletter, that's what you're going to read about in the autumn and maybe in the next year, is this trying to identify the successor for key positions within the Railway Mail Service Library, as well as the Boyce Railway Depot Foundation. However, since 2017, we've made a lot of progress. We've got something to show for it. Chances are, if you're up there in the Pacific Northwest, you're not coming down to Boyce, Virginia anytime soon. And that's the other thing that I want to focus on is to get the resources of the Railway Mail Service Library, we're doing like every other museum and institution. We're looking at how you digitize records, you get it on a website, you make it accessible. My view is, no, I understand you got to have a source of income. Some societies are having to charge money for what they have. If I can get somebody interested in the Railway Mail Service, that's worth a lot more to me than whatever compensation they're willing to pay for information about a particular cover or photograph or whatever else the research interest is. So that's what's going on in Boyce, Virginia. And so, Mr. Fisher, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thanks, Frank. Yeah, the whole idea of succession planning within organizations and how we, leverage this legacy to the future is a challenge that all of our nonprofit institutions, need to deal with. And so it's very informative. And Frank, like I say, I just enjoy the time that we spend together and talking about this niche activity for many people. I'm a model railroader, and I have to tell you, this is true confession time. I now run mail trains.
And I'll tell you what, I'll make sure that you got the right size car with the right road initials. Well, one point about that.
Yes, sir.
You can go to Author and you can go to various other Tyco and so on like that.
Sure.
Go paint a railway post office color, any color that you want. It's not necessarily close to the prototype.
Exactly.
You got to get into brass for that.
Well, I'm an N scaler. So, because I like running big trains, with, on wide curves and stuff like that. So,
yeah, well, I understand that. If you're really going to sort of model a railroad operation and you got limited space, that's the way to go. You see, I've been in the Train Collectors Association since 1967. I'm a life member. Probably one of the few life members that's still alive. And I like it big. I like O gauge, O scale railway post office cars that are brass. Now, the trouble is I can't afford them.
Well, my gosh, those are just crazy. But, the nice
I've got a
thing is,
few.
of course, we can see what the numbers are. I don't need to use like a magnifying glass on some of mine.
Yeah, well, and plus that, boy, they're a rivet counter's dream.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
If they were really done right, man, it looks like you got the shrinking machine out of some science fiction film, like Who Shrunk the Kids, and you shrunk down the real car, and now you got it in N scale, but for me, it'd be O scale. So, but that's a tough part is model railroading has its own challenges. And if anybody has any questions about the type of car that should be run in their model railroad, I do want to elaborate on one thing.
Sure.
You see photographs
Right.
of mail trains. Now, people say, let's say it's got 10 cars that are not passenger cars, and let's assume they're not being deadheaded. A lot of people call them all baggage cars. Is there any train that you know of where there's so many passengers traveling that you got to have 10 baggage cars? No.
You've got storage mail cars and you've got just this potpourri of stuff that was dragging mail around in the 60s, right?
That's right. And express,
And
milk.
express.
It's important for people to really recognize if you're doing model railroading, let's do it right. You
There
know,
you go.
you've got head-end traffic, and not everything's the Silver Streak, the Burlington Zephyr. You know, you got a lot of, and especially if you want to model some of the cars with heavyweight equipment, you know, you're going to get all sorts of stuff in there, and the passengers. I won't say they're insignificant. They're part of the reason for the train, but about a third of the train's revenue came from mail or from either railway, post office, or storage mail. And another good chunk came from Railway Express when Railway Express was still vibrant. And then there was milk. And so, you know, that was what kept a lot of these trains alive. So good to know for a model railroader.
So speaking of equipment, one question and it seems like is in the back of my mind. Isn't there a preserved RPO car at the museum in Duluth, Minnesota?
There is. There's also one closer to you all at the Sacramento Railroad Museum. It's a Great Northern, I believe it's car number 45, 60-foot railway post office car. Looks like it just came right out of the shops.
Really?
There's also one in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
It's nice to go to a railroad museum and see a preserved car. It's very uncommon to try to find a car that's set up so that it has an accurate working appearance on the inside. Now, when I went to the Sacramento Railroad Museum a few years ago, it's not hard for me to play dumb because I really am. Okay?
Yeah, it is.
And so anyway, I go into this car, you know, I look around. They got a docent in the car.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's Great Northern 42. It just blipped back into my mind. Great Northern 42. It was on the Empire Builder.
Yep.
And so you go on in there, you know, you look around. Oh, yeah, look at all this stuff. Oh, yeah. I wonder what they did in this car. Is this where passengers slept or, you know, what did they do? You know? So I asked this to the docent. The docent, at that time, the Elvis stamp had just come out. It was the debate about whether they want the young Elvis or the old Elvis. And of course, the young Elvis won.
Yeah.
That's all he talked about was Elvis. He had no clue as a docent what was done in that car. Yeah, I didn't call him on that. Oh,
No, of course not.
It's all interesting, you know.
Just
I'm
glad to have a
polite.
docent.
I'm not going to make somebody feel, even if they're ignorant, I'm not going to make them feel ignorant. You know, let them live in their little blissful world. But, you know, this is a sad part that even in museums where you have this rail equipment, not very many people know exactly how it was used. Now, there's another one in Oregon. It's got a 30-foot Southern Pacific car. And
yeah, if we had people in the audience, they would know where this is. So
yeah, right. It's Yakina Pacific. However it's pronounced, I'm butchering the name again. Okay. They've got a 30-foot car. They did a nice cosmetic restoration. For a while, they actually had people who sort of knew something about the car. But with the change in generation, I'm not sure they do. So, you know, there's a few examples around. I will just a plug for the Railway Mail Service Library Foundation, is that there's several. If you want to know where there's a railway post office car, I can try to help out people and show them or tell them where there's something they can look at closer to home. You're never going to find a railway post office car at Boyce, Virginia, because I don't have the money for a building. If you don't keep it in a building, it's going to rot.
yeah.
And we've seen some railroad museums that the stuff is just deteriorating, such as this big one in St. Louis, which will remain nameless because I don't want to create any bad feelings. But it's sad to see some of the equipment that's there. Ooh, it's so sad to see. But when you get people in the museum, and they don't even know anything about the equipment and how it was used and the stories that were there. The torch has not been passed. But I'll be glad to help anybody. But what I was going to mention is
Yes.
that so the Railway Mail Service Library does have a highway post office. There are only 2 highway post offices in the country that have all the interior fixtures.
Really?
The National Postal Museum has one. It's stuck in a warehouse someplace, probably never to see the light of day again.
Yep.
And then there's mine,
Oh,
or the Railway Mail Service Libraries.
okay.
That's the other reason for wanting to build this other building is I've got to have a 2-bay garage, which I'm calling the Vehicle Preservation Center. It's got to get restored. That thing is slipping every day into history if it sits outside. Got to protect what we got. So, highway post offices are a lot less common, but the reason why a highway post office is ideal is because it has all the same fixtures that you see in a railway post office car. It's got some rubber tires. You can move it around.
Oh.
If you want to pull it out for an exhibit, or field day, at the library, we pull it out, put it in the sunshine, let people go into it as a tour, put it back in. Can't do that with a rail car. Once it's parked on a section of track, it ain't going anyplace.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. Well, very good, sir. And I hope our audience of the future that watches this program enjoys it as much as I always do, Frank, when we get together. And of course, one thing I always have to say in closing is this presentation gets my stamp of approval. So there,
Hey, I like that.
yeah,
And you know what? It's been my pleasure.
excellent.
And if anybody has any more information, I still got the screen up that shows contact information. You know where to come. I invite all inquiries and look forward to hearing from everybody. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. Have a great spring and summer, and let's all go into the future together holding hands.
There you go. And in that future, Frank, there'll be an opportunity for us to get back together again, and we can share more stories from the Railway Mail Service in interesting ways that our country moved information around physically back in the day.
Well, exactly. And just on that point,
Yeah,
if you or any of the people listening to this video have something that's specifically focused on the Pacific Northwest, you've got interesting cover, that could be the source of a future presentation. So I invite that. I don't go around trying to collect things to make a presentation about, but with Oni being an exception. But anything else that may well be the source of a future presentation to your group or any other group is somebody comes to me and they've got something they think is interesting, and I'll take the time to research it. So with that, it's been great. Thank you very much for the invitation, Jonathan.
Yep.
And see you on the flip side.
very good. And with that note, I'm going to end our recording of today's program. Thanks everybody for watching this program in the future, and we'll be back on May 21st with Roy Gelder talking about the restoration of the Golden State Route. So until then, everybody, your host and moderator and our special guest, Dr. Frank Scheer, saying bye for now. There, now I'm unmuted. We're running a little late today. We had a bonus presentation at the beginning of the program. And, Eric, I think he was Mr. Sutherland stepping out of that car. I think that's what I thought, was that he was able to figure out, well, of course, it could be on a different day, so we don't really know for sure. But anyway. Those in the audience, you can see why I like having Frank on the program, because he's just really great and lots of fun. George, you got your hand raised, but you got to unmute. We got to wrap up here in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, just going to say a little bit. So that photo that he has there, I think it was taken by Phil Hastings of Trains Magazine. And the one that's on page 105 of UP Steam Northwestern District by Ehrenberger. looks like a series of pictures, because in the one I've got here, the dairy truck's not there and the guy's not in the doorway of the RPO, but it looks like the same angle. So he was talking about that engine. Looks like it was UP 3226, a P-77 Pacific, if anybody's interested, that also used to operate on the Joseph branch out of La Grande. The other thing I was going to say is the mail car he was talking about used to be available from Walthers for their Empire Builder train set and everything. So if you can find that car around, if you're interested in modeling it, it's around.
Well, thank you, George Foster, for the update. We have George and George the second today, so that's always nice. Bye, George. So anyway, anybody else got anything more before we tunnel out? Daniel Cozine, go ahead, please.
About 1976 or 7, I was there in Lake Whatcom Railway there at Park by myself. Phone rings, and it turns out it's the guy who was the director of the California State Railroad Museum. And when they got that GNRPO car, it was a shell. And he was calling all over the country for the steam director, and he's at Washington, so he's way down the list. Nobody had a clue of where he could find parts. Well, I said, well, I know where there's 3 or 4 of those, and they were scrapping them. So I got a hold, told him, and he, okay, fine. And a week or so later, I get a letter from him saying, hey, guess what? We got everything we needed. We hauled off to St. Paul, came back with a whole truckload. So that's the only reason that car has an interior. And I thought all these big museums had nothing. Like Whatcom was the only place that he could actually find everything he needed. I thought that was just a great story, but the least gave him the most.
Well, I remember taking pictures of that car when it was sitting in the old coach yard south of King Street Station.
Right,
So,
right. The junkyard there,
yeah.
I thought that was great, because he called all over the country, and he's down to Washington. So he's the last, the alphabetical order there, and so it was. But yeah, he went over there, and they hauled off a whole truckload of parts. So that's the only reason it has an interior.
Well, a testimonial, dear friends, because Daniel is just a tremendous asset. And again, while we're here, a special thanks for all your help on the Squiminar and helping us with getting the inventory to CRPA so that we could convince them that they really did have the images after all. So, you've been a big help, my friend.
Yep.
Anything else before we go? We're 2:48. My gosh, we're running a little long, but we had a nice bonus presentation from Steve Howes today on the update on the Sumter Valley. So if I don't hear anything, I am, as your host and moderator, going to move for adjournment. So with that in mind, this is Jonathan Fisher. This was the PNRA Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive biweekly Zoom program for May 7th, 2025. And our next scheduled broadcast will be on May 21st, 2025, where our scheduled guest will be Roy Gelder and the reconstruction of the Golden State Route. So until next time, your host and moderator saying bye for now.